Ukraine is doing whatever it takes to escalate this tension, this level of conflict, and it's doing so with sabotage on the territory of the Russian Federation. A Russian major general has been eliminated in his own car. As far as we know, and we'll see exactly what happened, how it was possible. What could the Russian Federation do to react to this event? Ukraine is not trying to raise the stakes and escalate the tension to its maximum. And it's doing so for several particular reasons. The Kia Sorento car exploded in a parking lot in Moscow, in the Arajava-Borisa district. The incident happened around 6:50 in the morning now, Moscow. When the driver sat in the car, the front part of the vehicle was destroyed by the explosion. The car exploded right in the courtyard of one of the residential complexes. It is presumed that the owner of the vehicle was injured, with a severely damaged leg and his whole body covered in burns, according to witnesses. The doctors continue. Back then, they were still fighting for his life. The neighboring cars were also damaged by the explosion. The residents of the building assume it was an act of sabotage against a high-ranking military officer. That's right, there it is. A major general of the Russian Federation has indeed been attacked by Ukraine. Reportedly in Moscow, the major general's car exploded. Fanil Sarvarov, head of the Operational Training Department of the Russian Ministry of Defense, took part in military actions in Chechnya, Ossetia, Syria, and also in Ukraine. A criminal case has been initiated due to the car explosion, and soon medical and technical explosive examinations will be carried out. The circumstances of the incident are also being investigated. An absolutely tragic incident, which, as you can see, has struck the Russian Federation where it hurts the most. And now what we're going to analyze is not so much the fact of, oh my God, again, Ukraine carrying out a terrorist attack, which indeed has been a terrorist attack carried out in absolutely civilian circumstances. And this should be clear to us. I mean, where right now we are seeing these absolutely terrible acts against the generals of the Russian Federation. We should see a residential courtyard full of children, full of people, I repeat, absolutely civilians who have done nothing. And so what we should focus on is, yes, the fact that it is a terrorist act, but Ukraine, first of all, when things are going worst for them on the front. We'll discuss this in today's live stream, and it's actually quite close to reality. Secondly, when their superiors order it, which is also related to how Ukraine is doing on the front. But let's analyze in great detail what is currently being said about this event in the Russian Federation, because I think it's part of my job as an informant. So it's about showing you the other side of the coin. Not only what Ukraine does, but also how the Russian Federation itself reacts to it. Indeed, many of you are telling me that similar actions were carried out by the famous Austrian painter, and that's true. And what about the Kiev regime? Is that all? Well, anyone with a bit of common sense knows perfectly well whose side they've shown themselves to be on, both ideologically and politically speaking, in every way and sense. I mean, it's becoming increasingly clear to us that these stories from the Russian Federation, as the West calls them, about denazification actually aren't just stories, and they are absolutely true and absolutely real facts. But what can the Russian Federation do? What could the response be? And above all, what do society and military analysts in the country say about the issue? And I think that's the most important part. When talking about the assassination of Lieutenant General Sarbarov in Moscow, it's important to point out some basic parameters of what's happening. First of all, people like this are not targeted just by chance. If he and his organization hadn't worked effectively throughout the entire period of the war, the special war, there wouldn't be a special operation according to the source. Of course, there wouldn't be any interest in him. Terror always has a practical nature. They attack those who interfere the most. Everything else is absolutely secondary. Secondly, the source says, I repeat, from the Russian Federation. The reaction to this kind of actions, at least for now, seems, so to speak. That is, there is a very significant part of Russian society that is indeed calling for a tough response. More actions against this kind of acts, more putting Ukraine in its place. And in this sense, I believe many of my followers will strongly agree with this kind of message. But I think we need to be very clear here. Not everything goes, and blowing everything up with bombs isn't the answer either. In any case, no. From the point of view of public statements, it seems insufficient. They don't solve much, but from the point of view of the perceived inevitability of the response, watch out. With this, it's absolutely clear that the Russian special services are already under enormous pressure. That is, they are working on all fronts and at all levels, the front line itself and the rear. They are expecting Ukraine in the rear because indeed there are some. Why should we fool ourselves? New territories, counterintelligence, logistics, their own operations, and so on and so on and so on. But precisely because of this, the response to these kinds of attacks must be, according to the source, fundamental, even if it is delayed over time and kept out of the public eye. It's not necessarily about symmetry or immediacy. It's about making sure these kinds of actions aren't seen as a one-sided game. In some cases, the response must be demonstrative, like that of the Mossad, not for revenge, but to restore the balance of risk. Otherwise, the enemy's logic is simple. If the price is acceptable, it means the tool works and can continue to be used. And that, quite simply, must never, ever happen. There's a third, subtler point. The only truly unclear point in this whole story is the extent of the actual work carried out by the structures to which Sarvara belonged. That is to say, the man who was actually attacked by Ukraine during almost 4 years of fighting. The Russian side has automatically eliminated command posts, headquarters, control centers, including the highest level targets. How many experienced enemy officers, including foreigners, were eliminated during these actions? We will probably never know for sure. This is the statistic, and it's not for public reports. In this sense, the fact that figures like this are being pursued is an indirect confirmation that the Russian Federation is working and working. Also, in an extremely painful way for the enemy. The question is not whether the Ukrainian side will try to repeat these attacks, but how quickly and in what form. Will the logic of the response be established so that this practice stops seeming safe for the enemy? And in this sense, sources from the Russian Federation also talk about the fact that there should be a reaction. Yes, but it is necessary to react in several ways and to do so in several different directions. What happened to Sarbarov is not the first time this has happened within the Russian Federation. Ukraine is used to carrying out these kinds of acts, and the West is used to ordering these absolutely infamous acts. And delving a little deeper, what does the Russian Federation itself believe? That is, the sources that most support the Russian government, the sources that are actually closest to it in terms of what should be done, and the sources that have the most capability, especially in terms of the media, of putting pressure because, in fact, they write about this to create appropriate media pressure. We're going to see it directly next. The logic of response after the murder of a person of this level can be rationally divided into two branches. But not in the sense of who to eliminate, but in the sense of the effect you want to achieve. This is written by the source, a Russian source, and one of the most notable ones answering the question, how can Russia respond to the assassination of Lieutenant General Sarvara? And it says the following. The first approach is demonstrative, meaning it has to be sent in a very clear and forceful way. A sign so that they don't dare to do it again, or at least think twice before doing it. Its goal is not revenge itself, but rather the restoration of the balance of risk. The enemy must see that moving to personalized terrorism automatically raises the stakes of the game. In deterrence theory, this is called an escalation mirror. After an attack on a high-level figure, the risk for the enemy's management circle rises sharply. At the same time, it is essential that this kind of signal does not work by quantity, but by the quality of the target and the inevitability of the consequences. It may be directed not so much at the Kiev regime itself, but at the external curators. Curators doesn't mean those who heal, but rather the external managers. Rather, that is, those who are there trying to organize this whole war affair. On the Ukrainian side, and in this sense, of course, some key figures stand out from Russia's perspective. It may not be directed at the Kiev regime, but rather at these organizers. Those who must understand that Russia can close what is the gray area of personal eliminations quickly and decisively. They're talking about the gray area because, it's a space in war, we call it no man's land, and it's under a thick fog of war. That is a space that isn't controlled in any way. That's what's really happening with these attacks, that the Russian Federation does respond. It responds militarily. But what seems to be missing is something from Russian society. An important part, in fact, of Russian society wants a strong response, also in symbolic terms. And that the Kiev regime gets the very clear message, this is as far as we go. The gray area, meaning the lack of control, has been closed from this point on. And Ukraine, therefore, the next time they dare to commit this kind of act, a similar act of terrorism, they're going to get hit hard. In this sense, an ideal figure, according to the Russian source, could be the head of the main intelligence directorate, Budano, that is, the head of Ukrainian military intelligence, or the head of the security service of Ukraine, which is Ukraine's national security, Malyuk. Although only at the level of an assassination attempt, that's what they claim from Russia. We don't even need to eliminate them as such. We just need to scare the hell out of them. What would we say in Spain in an eco-friendly way? That is, let them live there with the feeling that they could be caught at any moment by a just arrest. In metaphorical terms, this is the part, let's say, of signaling. The warning part, the metaphorical part. The second aspect is purely operational, structural. So, which do you think is most important? A demonstrative action should not and cannot replace real work. Careful here with what's being said by the Russian Federation and the difference in approach they have from the Russian side on one hand and the Ukrainian side on the other. Because what we're seeing in the Ukrainian regime and command, with their orders to send more and more men into this absolute slaughter, is actually the complete opposite. Ukraine picks up the signal and tries to take it to the highest media levels, but in Russia, they say a demonstrative action should not and cannot replace real work. I repeat, it's not by chance. The main effect is achieved not by attacking individuals, but by systematically eliminating the officer corps, those who develop, coordinate, and execute decisions within the framework of special events. This level is what guarantees the reproducibility of the approach and its imminent and very clear escalation, absolutely necessary to effectively achieve all the objectives proposed by the special military operation. This is what stands out. This level is what guarantees reproducibility. This normally doesn't make the headlines, but it directly affects the enemy's real capabilities. Ultimately, the choice isn't binary. Demonstrative actions are a language of signaling and deterrence, while real actions are a language of war and attrition. And if the response is built only on one of these paths, will it dissolve into symbolism or go unnoticed by those it's truly meant for? This is what they're saying from the Russian Federation. If you want my opinion on why the Russian Federation isn't eliminating, Here's what I think. They're not really asserting themselves because that's something that's really missing, and I understand that. I'm always reading your comments, and I read this message from Liu Sivaya. But the thing is, Russia has to react. Russia has to do something. It can't be that the Russian Federation loses a lieutenant general and does absolutely nothing. Or that, well, yes, it attacks Ukraine with massive bombings, but there isn't a symbolic, truly serious response. And here I just have to say one thing. And in part, I can understand both opinions. That is, on one hand, I can understand how you feel, which in some ways is also how I feel. So it's this longing for justice to truly prevail in the world. Generally speaking, they carry out terrorist attacks, but this is also where the second part comes in. Responding proportionally to a terrorist attack, that is, responding symbolically, even if it means carrying out an assassination attempt. Well, for example, from the head of the security service of Ukraine, Maluko, for example, also quoted from the head of the Ukrainian main intelligence directorate, Budino, it would necessarily equate the Russian Federation to what Ukraine is today. I think this is exactly what is being avoided or what they are trying to avoid. But here we have to understand one thing. Vladimir Putin is, first of all, a statesman. There's a reason why the West, the collective West, doesn't know how to deal with the Russian Federation. Many are still talking about whether Russia is a communist country or if Russia is little more than a kingdom, whether Russia is a dictatorial regime or if Russia is in fact a wild capitalist country. They don't know how to understand it. They don't know how to understand Vladimir Putin. Most of the Western politicians don't know. Above all, to see that difference between what a true leader is, that is, an international statesman, Vladimir Putin, ultimately, and what is just a simple puppet or just a simple political figure, like a half clown put there by the city council. I mean, the crap that, much to my regret, those of us who are actually living have to deal with. Or are we involved with the collective West, in my case, the European Union, directly with Spain, much to my regret? We just have to put up with it. The fact is that Vladimir Putin is indeed a statesman, and what he thinks, when he doesn't act, he doesn't send to the Russian Federation. Well, because these attacks, of course, are coordinated at the highest military level. But for that, the president also has to give his approval, especially when it comes to something that could involve the image of the Russian Federation at the international level. And that's where we need to understand that patience, prudence, and perseverance are the main characteristics if we want to truly understand that country's stance regarding the special military operation. Russia can't act like Ukraine because Russia is not Ukraine, and if it acts like Ukraine, it will lose its reason because reason is with the one who does. It's on the side of truth on one hand, but it's also on the side of the one who knows how to behave with proper honesty. And sometimes that hurts, and sometimes that's a burden, sometimes that means losses. And I truly say this, not only from the analyst's point of view, I say it from a personal point of view. Here in this conflict, I lost a very close friend. Now, some are writing to me, but many of you are watching the videos I'm posting from Donbass. And those who are writing are saying that these are videos generated with artificial intelligence. Because in some videos, I don't have the tattoo on my face. They have no idea and don't listen or understand what I say in the videos. These are videos from the very first day I spent in Donbass, from my first arrival, from my first conversation with the civilians. They're being released now because Alexis Castillo is gone. When Alexis Castillo was alive and the recordings were made, they couldn't be released because basically due to the special unit he was in, he didn't have permission from his superiors to go around with a journalist and record. Events that indeed could mark a turning point in the awareness of some people. I'm not going to act all high and mighty here either, but Alec and I knew that, we could show the reality to as many people as were willing to watch us. Maybe it was 2,000 or 3,000, but it was more than nothing and essentially slipped out of their headquarters. So I couldn't show these videos before, and then there was a time when I couldn't edit these videos. And actually, I'm not the one editing them because it's too hard and because in this war, we truly lose what is most valuable. And it's not just one person. My son is named after another person who was very close to my family, who is a hero of Russia and who died in the special military operation. He died as the hero he was on the Kharkov front. And all of this is a set of things that leads many of us to wonder, why on earth? Why isn't there a harsher response? That's what should have been done from the beginning. But that would mean putting ourselves on the same level as those on the other side, and we're not the same. That's messed up, but is it true? The killer? In the case where someone faces a good person and ends up being killed in a vile, cruel way and tortured by that good person, well, it's so that the good person doesn't lose their mind. Maybe, but only partially, especially in the eyes of much of the world. And here I am using this analogy, applying it to the geopolitical situation. If the partners are there, the population of the Russian Federation is there, there is the population to whom Russia says that we are not the same and that we are coming to protect. That is the message that has been sent from the beginning, from Russia, and indeed, it is also there. And we have to be consistent, and sometimes we have to turn the other cheek, not always. And with some attacks, for example, on Russian ships, which indeed already require a response, sometimes very symbolic, other times very clear and forceful. But when we are talking about attacks carried out in circumstances like the attack that just happened just a few hours ago while we are here, residential buildings where children live, where mothers live, where ordinary people live who are afraid. They want all of this to end because in Russia, everyone also wants the military operation to end. But they want it to be done firmly and definitively because they understand that NATO will not stop going after the Federation. What do you want me to say in this case? My analysis is what it is. It might disappoint you, but I think the symbolic answer is yes. It should definitely be there, but it shouldn't be done under these same circumstances, nor should it be similar. In other words, it can't be a terrorist operation carried out by the Russian Federation, much less be a common occurrence, as is happening right now with the Ukrainian case, because then Russia will be the same, because then many will have fallen in vain, showing that indeed, on one side, they will be better people. And they were fighting for good and for the truth.